from my own literature reviews regarding community health and like ethnographic or social research. And since we were just briefly touching upon positionality that you mentioned, like being kind of like an quote unquote outsider or insider. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I've come across this concept of community researcher identity. And the idea basically, to sum it up, is that a researcher studying in a community, there's like a certain identity attached to the researcher. And the basis of that identity is dependent on the community membership of that researcher. So this term is often coined as as a researcher identity, like I was mentioning. And in previous years, this identity was often seen as like a binary of being like you're either like an insider researcher, like you know the people that and you're part of that membership, or you're an outside researcher. So just to like lay down some definitions, and I'm going to be reading these off. So, insider researcher identity can be defined as researchers who conduct research with the population that they are also a member of. So, for your case, that would be like you mentioned you immigrated from Bangladesh, so you have that community, or it could be the fact that you were a physician, so there's like a community membership as a head researcher here. So, these people that are insiders may share language, identity, lived experiences with the subjects that they're studying with. And this role, there's like some benefits to it. This role can lead to legitimacy or acceptance within the community. And there can also be potential drawbacks, which I'm sure we will touch upon in this conversation in the future. And in contrast to that, outsider researcher, so the other end, is where the researcher doesn't belong to the community that they're studying. Traditionally, because this type of research goes back a while, and traditionally, this has been viewed as a more of a neutral, quote unquote, neutral or like an unbiased, objective like doctrine. As we move forward down this conversation, I'm sure we'll discuss like the dynamics of these different identities and how that interacts and your own personal experiences. So kind of bringing everything to the most recent views of like a more nuanced approach with research identities. So the researchers now from the stuff that I've read and from our previous conversations as well, researchers now are looking at this identity of outsider insider as more of a dynamic thing that's constantly moving and based on different circumstances and like where they're positioned at the time. So it's often seen as like a spectrum, and it's claimed to be more of a pragmatic view of community-based research because no one is 100% an outsider or 100% an insider. We all have different identities. This is a multidimensional approach. And you can be an outsider on a certain axis, but then you might be an insider in other axes as well. So it's kind of like this dance between like the different identities that the researcher can wear. For example, like I mentioned, a researcher may have insider membership based on their shared ethnicity, but may subscribe to an outsider status based on their socioeconomic status or their political beliefs or their religious beliefs. The researcher identities are often found to be on a spectrum. And now that I've mentioned all this background about community health and community research and research identities, what has your experience been working in the Bangladeshi Canadian community and where did you find yourself?
Thanks for the backdrop. I think it's a great backdrop. Thank you so much. I hope definitely the audience, the listeners will benefit hugely from that. And you're right, in this current days of research identities and the way the racialized community member are doing their own research in that's me included in that example, and trying to promote this type of research. I think this uh, self identification, positioning ourselves, our own, is so important. I think one thing that I realized, as you may have captured from my previous experience sharing, like I thought I was an insider. I shared the language. I shared the ethnic identity with the communities that I've been working with. Lived experience. There will be a range of difference, but being in the very near scenario, I appreciate lots of lived experience related issues they're facing. There is no doubt about that. But on the other hand, so I thought I was an insider. That hey, let's go in. I will be doing research with the Bangladeshi communities and everything. But I have an identity as a researcher as well. I'm a part of academia who are little bit of an unknown entity in the community, treated as an unknown entity by the community. We academics, we are in a sense, if the community is a ground floor, we are in the seventh floor. So I have been in that positioning. So community knows that, okay, he's coming from there. So the initial, playing cricket together or playing football together or being in our, cultural festivals, that's a different ball game. But when I'm asking for to do research in the community, means I am asking people to give me access to their information or data. Now I am encroaching a little bit in their personal thing. Like data is who Masroor is. I'm asking, hey Masroor, this is the issue. I would love to know a little bit more from you and would love to use it as a data so that we can get information from 20, 30 people, summarize those and come up with a better understanding of some scenarios. Research question one, research question two, or research question three. Now here we are in a position where we are in a give and take. Like you are giving me something, I'm taking something from there. So that's scenarios. And this is a little bit of new scenario for most of the people in the community. And then they start, when it is the individual level data sharing or data providing scenario, the reluctance or the unknowing component of, okay, so what's this about? That starts playing in. So when that starts playing in, my insider role does not overcome that piece. They will say, okay, good for you, Dr. Chaudhary, you are from Bangladesh. Good for you from Turin, you are from Bangladesh. Good for you, you play cricket with us. But you are asking me a question about domestic violence. I'm not sure if I want to talk to you about that. Or you're asking me about information about my struggles raising my kids. I'm not going to share information about that. So when I went in as an insider, the insider is not like you go in and you get everything and you do research. The piece of engagement, the piece of those, listening with the blank slate, the piece of the transparency and honestly showing who you are, this still is valid there. But yes, you get some benefit because if they would have, said the Bangladeshi community would have totally said no more strictly to other researcher of color who may be black or maybe from Chinese origin or maybe East Asian origin. Compared to them, I have the little bit of benefit. If you let me, hey Masroor, I'm doing this. If you don't shut me out. If you give me some opportunity, I can try to explain why it is good and how it might be good. So, like this feeling of partial insider is there. Now, it's more of a looking at it, a glass which is half full or half empty. If you look at the, immediate interaction, definitely this is half empty because you are not an insider. Immediate interaction is not possible. But if you look at it as a half full glass, means there is still chance you can work a little bit more and start, getting people's attention or to get people engagement relatively easier because your glass is half full. So that is my, experience of how it all started.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. That makes sense. Like having that community like buy-in because of like your initial kind of like dipping your foot in the water and just figuring out like, hey, this is where I'm coming from. But then you mentioned that once you put on that researcher hat, there was like often some resistance from the people because they may not like they may find themselves being confused about why this person would be asking about these questions or why what their intentions might be behind asking these questions or interacting. So thank you for bringing that to the light.
Yeah, and
Um,
and I just wanted to add, like as a researcher, when I'm going to them as a researcher hat, I have this different dimensions added to my portfolio or positionality or the way they see me. So that new unknown different dimension of, oh, he's researcher, he's asking lots of questions and he's asking questions that are, like lots of, interesting questions, but might not be a very simple hi hello type of question. It will be deeper question. So how do I handle with it? So most of the reflection of the people handling by shutting them off. Who wants an extra layer of complexity in their life?
Right.
But as a researcher whom I'm an insider or a partial insider, I have probably I will get some benefit of doubt or some accommodation from them. Okay, hey, I would love to explain a little bit more. They will say, okay, okay, so what do you have to say? Tell us. So I have that benefit.
Yeah, like initially they have that they can feel like this person understands me a little bit because of like my lived experiences and there's commonality and common ground between, and then you slowly like breach into that world of, oh, this person, they might be curious as to why they're being asked these questions, and
Mhm,
maybe I will explain a bit more. Like they might have not said these things to someone else in the community that's not a
mhm,
researcher. So
mhm,
like your outsider identity as a researcher kind of comes in and marries itself to the insider identity as the Bangladeshi member or the physician member or the soccer team
yeah.
member. So okay, so that makes sense, yeah. So I kind of want to circle back to a more definitions based questions, I guess, or like
Mhm,
just to contextualize the conversation a little bit more for the people that are listening. So, different people when they do research as an insider, they acquire certain benefits, like you mentioned, from their positionality and the research identity. And sometimes they'll have that buy-in that you mentioned, and there's like some level of openness and trust because of the baseline commonality that exists between the different members, so the researcher and also the members that are being researched or the participants.
mhm,
They may feel like the insider researcher can truly understand their voice and have more trust in that manner. The rhetoric might be that outsider researchers, like you're mentioning, someone from a different, let's say, ethnic background,
mhm,
may never be able to understand them because they don't have the similar lived experiences or that buy-in that you have. So for outsider researchers, it might take a long time to establish that trust, or that trust may never even be there because of their researcher identity. But outsiders often have that scientific doctrine of being neutral, being like viewing the community from a bird's eye view, if you will, and being more objective in that manner. So, in
mhm.
your experiences, where did you find yourself, and what did that look like? I know you already mentioned a bit of it earlier, just to like dive a bit
Yeah.
deeper into it.
So yeah, so let's think about it. Like when you think about a researcher and researcher as an insider, or even in the context that we are talking about, partial insider. So there are advantages. Means as a starting point, the researchers they might have a feeling of stranger or seen as a stranger by the community members that will not be there. Yes, they might not be sure about, okay, so what Turin is talking about now? He is talking about research. So that skepticism might be there, but I will not be seen as a stranger by the group members, right?
Mhm.
So that's one thing. So one of the things that I always say to my students and mentees is like, hey, you need to understand the community ecosystem or map
Right.
your community where you're trying to work, because that's so important for engagement and community involvement piece. So as an insider, I will have more connected way of doing it. I will know which elders to go and talk. Lots of aspects. I will be referred much more easily to different people, and I will be. I have an already a general idea of the navigation, so that will help. And again, we always talk about cultural sensitivity, so I will have that as an insider. I will be knowing about the culture. I will be knowing the greeting words. I will be knowing about the group's interactive culture, like how do I say salam, or do I say namaste, or do whatever it is. So those type of thing I know when to go to people, that's within the culture of the social cultural norm. And hopefully I will be less falling into the prey of this generic stereotyping. But again, it can go both ways, but
Right.
relatively less. That's happened to me. And again, as I said, like, partial insider, that will have me a relative more probability to gain acceptance. That will reduce my time investment into moving towards trust and cooperation.
Mhm.
So again, I will know how to some extent, socially, culturally, how to frame the questions. But and again, based on that, I will not. I will always suggest myself as well as others. Hey, always bring research community members to your research team to shape up research questions and everything. So I call them community scholar and citizen researcher program or approach, which we can talk about in another day. On the other hand, I will be a little bit more faster in terms of preparatory groundwork that I will be doing.
Right, right. Because you're
And
already there.
yeah, it's already there. And I will have more friends' contribution to my work because within the community, I have some friends. I am an insider. There are some well wishers of mine and who knows directly what I'm doing. So I have, a little bit of ready-made champions, community champions. I can, gain some momentum and get some, a little bit of more accelerated referral through them.
Yeah. There's the groundwork and the trust,
Already
everything has been
done because I'm
established.
an
Yeah.
insider.
Yeah.
Definitely I have to overcome lots of things. The probability of moving the research Turin from a partial insider to an insider, but that again, I have the benefit of doing it in a faster way and more, culturally sensitive way, which will make it again more faster and, how to call it, like gain more acceptance and move towards building trust and cooperation.
These are kind of like the benefits of having that
Mhm.
insider hat. So I want to talk a little bit about the opposite side of that coin. The researchers have also identified certain drawbacks of being an insider, like having that insider tag on you, and studying a population with like the common community membership. So some of the challenges, I just want to list them off to you and let me know if it kind of rings true.
Mhm.
So some of these challenges include differentiating between like personal experiences from like the experiences of other people. So you might think like, oh, like because you have that common ground, that this must have been the experience of the other person as well, right? So there's that aspect of it. And some may also face like issues of confidentiality when it's relating to sensitive topics, because participants may not want to disclose all that information to you because you have that insider tag, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you kind of mentioned that earlier in the beginning when you're contextualizing your research, that they may not want to talk to you about domestic violence or,
Mhm.
other sensitive topics which are sensitive to the culture that you are studying and or that you're part of.
Yeah.
Instead, researchers may also find that they have personal biases when researching the community that they are part of. So then kind of takes away from, like, let's say, the scientific rigor that people keep parroting of, like being very objective, very objective, very objective, right?
Mhm.
So then there's like certain biases that can seep in if you are also part of that community.
I will go couple of things. I think remind me about the personal biases, being objective, and being part of this one. So because this is an interesting learning that I have, but I will touch it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So let me start by saying, like, the disadvantages. You're right. The disadvantages is like how the community members view me, and how the image shapes up. The skepticism, the example I gave you before, like there were a group of people or certain people who were thinking, is Turin going to go for a political goal of his to get into a position of power in our political system? That's why he's in the community more. Is it so? So those things are a natural thing because I suddenly brought in my role of doing research in community. So that wouldn't have been a case for an outsider to overcome, because the outsider, either they will make a decision, oh, he's a researcher, yeah, from the University of Calgary, great, I decide to give him data or not to give him data. Simple as that.
It's very like specific, like this person is
Specific a
this. Yeah.
decision, like, those a little bit of practical consideration. Do I have time? Are they compensating me for time? Anything. It's not about this social interaction thing. But me being in that insider role and partial insider role, so that thing is there. So they might not see me as a researcher. They might see me as a advocate for his own some agenda. So again, but on the other hand, as I said, like the only thing that will overcome that is time.
Right.
So community engaged research, we cannot do it in a parachute and parachute out way. If I
Hmm.
follow the parachute and on parachute out approaches, I will not be able to, nobody will be able to overcome this type of, you know, uh, I will not say this type of fog around their intention that people might perceive.
Would you elaborate a little bit on the parachute in, parachute out? I
Oh,
know this because we've talked about it, but just
okay.
for the audience, yeah.
So I could have done this research in this way. Like I got a research project and I did this, created a survey material. And then, with all my connections and everything, I go in and I get the surveys filled up, maybe up to 400 people, 200 people, 100 people, based on my connectivity, but without creating the relationship or without creating my own position known to extended community, that hey, Turin is a researcher who works in the community and he does research with the community members, and this is a program of research. He's here to stay. He's here to do things slow and easy. It's not Turin got here one time and got the data and go back and we never see him again. So that way of doing research is parachute in and parachute out. You parachute in, you collect the data, you go away.
All right. It's
But
like
that's
different
not,
points in time. You're coming in, grabbing the
yeah,
data and being the researcher and leaving and then
yeah.
coming back again. Yeah.
And that's totally against the principle of community engaged research.
Right.
Because we would love to do research where community benefits from it. The parachute and parachute out way doesn't benefit the community at all.
Yeah. It also creates like mistrust for the people that
Oh,
are coming in and
definitely.
out, right? Yeah.
And probably they will allow me to once, twice, and the third time they will shoot me down. They
Yeah.
shoot down the parachute. So
Yeah.
crash.
Yeah. No, yeah, I can totally I can see that happening just because obviously like you said the skepticism part of it already
Mhm.
exists from the beginning, and it's definitely creates situations where for your future research and for the prospective research that could occur and the projects that could potentially benefit the community, it might be shot down based on like that action of kind of going in and going out and then creating mistrust in the long run.
So
Yeah.
the next one I would like to handle is the bias component.
Right.
So, as a researcher, we are trained how to be objective, right?
Right.
We are trained how to be objective. We are trained how to control bias in our research, analyze things, controlling bias in our research. That's a methodological side. But sometimes people talk about bias where they said, oh, Turin being Bangladeshi, he knows quite a bit and he's a man. I'm a man. And his way of looking at it will be in the men's side. So is that a bias he's injecting to the study? So to me, that's, I will not say the methodological or study design bias. That's who I am.
Right.
If you even, if you, whatever you do to me, I will not be able to look at the data from an angle of not being a man,
Right.
not being a Muslim Bangladeshi, not being a highly educated Bangladeshi. I cannot change those things.
Right.
But on the other hand, I can make sure those things doesn't convolute the data because that's my training as a researcher.
Mm.
Now, if I collect data in a wrong way, that bias is wrong.
Right.
If my research questions when I developed it, if I didn't have proper community member involved in it, if I know that this research question is quite a little bit of there is a gender difference in this research question, if I don't reach out to a community member or a other researcher, hey, can you bring in the lens and make sure that the lens of gender are incorporated in it, am I making a mistake? That's a preparatory phase of the research.
Hmm.
If I haven't done that, that's a methodologically flawed thing I'm doing.
Right. That would be like a
So
methodological deficiency in the
in
study.
bias, handling bias,
Right.
possible
Right.
bias.
Right.
But on the other hand, me being Turin, as I said, the men, the highly educated Bangladeshi, the Muslim person from Bangladesh, if you want to take this away, it's not possible. That's bring the responsibility to me when I'm interpreting the finding. I have multi-perspective incorporated by involving multi-angle people in the research
Right.
process.
Right.
So I'm not doing in my cubicle analyzing and say, voila, I have done the analysis and this is the final thing.
You're like sensitizing your methodological aspects based on the community
Mhm.
that you're studying, so that there is like a potential, like you, that in that way you can get rid of some of these like personal biases.
Not
It's
get rid of things. I would say include other type of biases so that we can come a combined sort of a perspective.
okay, just understanding like the combination of the perspectives.
Yeah,
Okay.
and come up with a summary perspective or a cumulative perspective. So
Hmm.
another disadvantage of the research means disadvantage in this sense that this is a potential loophole or crack that we fell through is reliance on participants whom I feel comfortable with. So if I'm doing a research in the community, being an insider, I know there are two things in research. One is like, am I listening from the people of all the domains or subgroups or all the groups of the community? So this is one thing. Another thing in the research is the number, how many people I have listened to. Now think about it. If I'm doing a research that, for example, you and me, we are doing, we somehow belong, you and me, in a similar social cycle. Like I know your parents, we met quite a bit on and off. When you come back, we normally chat up for coffee. So I will say you and me are in the same social silo or the group or the clan, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Now, to do a research, we normally say like, 15, 20 interviews. 15 interviews is good enough in terms of number, volume. Now think about all those 15 interviews you and me, when we are doing the research, are done within our silo,
Right.
forgetting that there are other silos in the community.
Right.
There are other group of people who doesn't, who is not exactly same of who we are. There might be a group of people who have lower education and who have, something else going on in their struggle in their life. Now, if you are asking the research we normally do, primary care access, only within our group of people, and we fill up those number 15, like, okay, 15 interviews done, will that be
Mm.
representative of the community that we are trying to work on?
No, that creates like an echo chamber, basically parroting all the things that we
Yes.
already know and want to like
So
research. Yeah.
that's a loophole. That's an disadvantage of being an insider.
Right.
Again,
Right.
that loophole we need to understand, be aware of, and try to overcome as we do research. That's why you remember I talk about my mentees and the students. They have to do a community mapping first,
Right.
because then we know that whom we are missing. Probably,
Right. Just to make sure you're
probably
capturing like the true representation of the community.
at least the best possible thing we can do.
Right.
For example, if you are doing a research on gender issues, if I'm doing a research, probably within my own, silos or own echo chamber, I will be probably not be reaching out, probably will fail to reach out or include the people who are two spirits
Mm-hmm.
or non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have my already, the community mapping done, then I will say, wow, Turin, you are doing a gender research and missing out on those the people in the community. So we need to proactively try to find, engage, and reach out to them.
Right.
So that disadvantage of being here, it's easy to miss out those things if you are not careful from the starting. If you don't know that, you have to be careful about it.
Right. Making sure that you are capturing the
Yeah,
population that needs to be captured to the best of your ability, and there's
yeah.
no gaps in the methodological approaches that you're taking.
There will be gaps because
Mm-hmm.
we are human beings. We will not have engagement in every layer of the community.
Right.
But then we know where the gaps are. We
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that when we are, presenting our results. We acknowledge that when we acknowledge that, oh, this research is not totally complete. It's totally incomplete without having those groups, engaged with. Then we should not do that research, and we should not, say that my research is complete until we make that happen.
Right. It's
Okay.
so fascinating hearing these perspectives because in the literature that I kind of scoured prior to this interview, just preparing for it,
Mhm,
there seems to be some different approaches or tactics and techniques that social researchers are often employing in
mhm,
order to like navigate these tensions and potentially mediating the biases that can exist. Like you
mhm.
said, there's no way you can completely get rid of them because you're a human being, and so acknowledgement seems to be a big part of that as well. So some researchers that I found through my reviews have suggested to practice reflexivity through the
Oh,
research process. So this can look like for the audience members, because I'm sure you're aware of this, and so am I. But I just want to inform everybody else that this can look like an in-depth and introspective, like critical evaluation of how one's positionality is impacting the data. So kind of like teetering along what we've talked about throughout this conversation, but this in this way like the potential biases can be addressed in a rigorous manner, and then it's also scientific in its nature, and it's like turning the lens on itself. The researcher can understand like, okay, this is where I am a partial insider, I'm a partial outsider, or wherever they may be on the spectrum, that this is how like the way I'm viewing things is going to impact the data basically and the community that I'm studying.
there is this disadvantage of being a researcher is like experiencing, the role conflicts.
All right.
I again, this is part of your the things that you mentioned, reflexivity, positionality.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I?
Right.
So, sometimes I might feel that, oh, this is such an important thing. This, despite what am I hearing from my respondents, oh man, they are not understanding. Oh man, that's not that advocacy piece of your inside, because everybody believes in something.
Right.
Nowadays, I introduce myself to my mentees and everything. Hey, I am a preacher now.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is like, but the research, you don't want a preacher there. You want a researcher there.
Mm-hmm.
So, being as a positionality, you might want to take the advantage of being an insider to push things that you think are right
Yeah.
to the audience that you're dealing with. But no, that should not be done.
Right.
If listen with a blank slate, that's the researcher thing. Analyze using your framework, but when you're listening, don't impose yourself on this one. And being an insider, we get entangled between the of
Right.
researcher versus advocates. So, advocates for the cause. So, we need to understand that piece. We need to, and that's a methodology approach of the within the methodology, how to conduct the interviews or how to
Yeah.
conduct the things, how to build the survey questionnaires. That your advocacy piece is tamed and your researcher open to any response is clearly the one, the mask or whatever you call it is in front. So
Mm-hmm.
you as a researcher need to have role clarity, because that will influence how you deal with it. And being an partial insider, your advocacy role, due to because you are in your somewhat natural habitat, that role might try to push
Right.
your
Right.
the researcher role. That researcher is there to get
Yeah.
people's views, not influenced by me.
No, that actually beautifully ties in into like the second technique that a lot of these researchers actually talk about is this idea of social perspective taken. So if reflexivity is like zooming into your own biases and understanding like how your positionality affects the research, then social perspective taking is kind of opposite of that, like completely zooming out as far as you can go in order to see like how different components of the community are actually interacting together. So this kind of brings me back to what you started the conversation with about like your research with the indigenous communities and understanding like from like a zoomed in intent like a bias perspective, you would be like, oh, this is like causative factors and this is why these populations will have diabetes by the end of their life, for example, right? But in this view, you kind of minimize, like when you're zooming out, you're doing the social perspective taking, you minimize the egocentric view that you just mentioned a few minutes ago about like the idea of like making sure that everybody believes in something. So you acknowledge that firstly, but making sure that that isn't sprayed across all of your research and that it's minimized. So kind of taking away from that egocentric view and then trying to mitigate those biases that naturally exist. So those are the kind of the two big tactics or techniques that I've found to be used in this space of like mitigating the potential biases that people may have as an insider. So I know you've already spoke about it like just a minute ago, but are there any other things that you'd like to add to this or any specific examples from your time working with the Bangladeshi Canadian community?
I think I had to teach myself, how to take this social perspective, views, and everything in this context. Means when we used to do data crunching, it was a social perspective because we didn't have the interaction with the individual human being. So I think that's a great way to start when you collect the data. But when you interpret the data, then you have to come in your, looking about your own reflexivity, positionality, and you will become aware of it. The more you practice about it, then you know that, oh, this research needs input from a person, a woman or feminist researcher who can help me make sense of the data better beyond me as well. And one more thing that I started doing is, can we include the community members in this space? I believe in involving all the spaces, but specifically this space, on making sense out of it. But again, community members are not research trained. Despite that, beautifully they pick up on lots of things. But we need a counterpart if we are doing this type of research, that whom I believe that will be those angles will be needed to be considered as well. And again, this is not a fluke belief. This is a more of a, hey, Turin, this is the project. You have been trained as a researcher. You know how to deal with these things. So you need a feminist angle to this one. You need a decolonial angle to this one. You need a social justice angle to this one. You need a, oppressors angle to this one as well. So those things, as a researcher, when we're doing our homework, planning our study design, we are trained to figure those out.
Right.
That makes a difference between a simple go in and data collection
Like you're
researcher.
navigating the complexities of the whole situation, the holistic picture of all the different components that are informing it.
Yeah, and that's the study design phase.
Right.
You decide
Okay.
on those on the study design mostly.
It's interesting to me because working with you over the past few years and like going to these community engagement like events, I've seen how the community interacts with you, and I've kind of seen everything firsthand, observing it as like a fly on the wall, but also I've had opportunities to also interact with the community that we've worked with over the
Mhm,
past 5 6 years,
mhm.
that I've gotten to know you and I've gotten to contribute to your mission. How would you summarize your journey looking from the beginning until now? I know this is like a very broad question and you've contextualized it throughout the interview. So, but I would like to just close this interview on, in your view, how you were like perceived by the community in the beginning, and how do you think you're being perceived now, and how do you perceive the community now? Like, where are you?
Great. Thank you so much. So I think I will summarize me myself in the research side. I will summarize me myself to be a learner. Still, I'm learning.
Mhm.
I'm learning in two angles. I'm learning at two angles is who am I or who I am. Because in every research question that I do, this question differs. It's interesting. For example, if I'm talking about equity research, equity of people through the social justice lens, who am I changes? I'm a privileged person. I have been, you know, I have been in the giver side because I have lots of things to give to, ensure some equity is also moving towards the equity deserving group. But if you think about the domestic violence research, then I need to figure out who am I again, because I am a man, first of all, and I am a man who have a wife. I live my own life with some, own parameters and everything. That's who am I. Again, if I'm talking about primary care access research, that's my primary research. Who am I? I am part of the primary care arena.
Right.
So I'm that side. So everything I do, every time I learn, and learning also increases and gets more polished, and things change because I start thinking in a different way after 10 years, 7 years in this one. And also learning who are the community. And based on these two, the engagement and community engagement interaction, they all changes. And research questions are more coming up from the practical experience. This is a gap, that is a gap, my friends are not having this one in a good way, and oh, lots of people not having this one in a good way. That's a research topic. So in that way, on the other side, as a researcher, but the more I'm working in this health literacy domain, I have this character developed that's more of a, I can contribute to some improvement to somewhere. That's not a research thing. That's a more of a Turin doing some community organizing to do some improvement in the things that he saw that are not that good. So here I'm the preacher side. Again, preacher side, the clarity of what do I mean by preaching? How much can I do? That's more of a, what I'm good for, what I'm not good for. If you ask me to do lots of things that I'm not good for, that's useless. So should I do something that I'm good for? Like, for example, probably given the experience and the position and the resources and the connectivity I have, I am good in mentoring people, young people who are trying to build their career, or doctors coming from Bangladesh, or nurses or dentists coming from Bangladesh who want to build a career in the research side. That piece I am good for. So this thing is like, these are all have been changing. I'm not sure will it go on changing all over as long as I work, but that's the point who I am. And uh, that's the thing, like that's the my journey look like, a learner's journey and a preacher's journey.